I really remember that process of selecting the 97 good practices. It was kind of really tricky at various points. And when we thought about how we wanted to design these new networks, we wanted to do it in a way that was quite simple, but at the same time also quite innovative. So in the end, we came up with this structure, which is 3 pillars. The first part is understand, second part is adapt, and the third part is reuse. And Matt, maybe just tell us a bit about why this understand phase is so important.
Yeah. The first part of the transfer networks was for the partner cities to really begin to understand the intricacies of the good practice and the lead partner city. This is a daunting but very important task. The transfer study taught us 2 key lessons as to what works in this understand phase. First, there is a real need for the network and partner cities to dig deep into the good practice and understand 6 things. 1, why it was developed in the first place. 2, what its component parts and elements are. 3, who has been responsible for developing and delivering it, which stakeholders. 4, what challenges it has faced and how they have been overcome. 5, what impact it has had. And 6, whether there's scope for improvement in the good practice city itself. Many networks did this through a boot camp type event, encouraging partner cities to learn as much as possible about the good practice during an intense visit to the good practice city. Second, there is a real need for the transfer network to have the right team in place to enable effective understanding of the good practice. There has to be a lead partner team that understands the good practice intrinsically and its context, strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for transfer. The lead partner team needs to be accompanied by a lead expert with a little bit of knowledge about the good practice theme, but far more importantly, the facilitation and animation skills required to understand the good practice and activate the transfer. At the partner city level, there has to be stakeholders involved in the transfer networks that are prepared to come to transnational meetings and learn about the good practice. They would exchange on their local context in relation to the good practice with others, and most importantly, go back to their cities and activate that learning with their URBACT local groups. It is important that at the understand phase, a blend of stakeholders are involved from each partner city, a project manager type role, those who will be practically responsible for realising the transfer, ULG members and politicians. So the understand phase needs a real strong understanding of the good practice. It also needs the correct stakeholders involved. What about the adapt phase of the transfer networks? What did the study find, Ed?
Wow, I mean, we learned so much about the adapt phase. I guess the big takeaway was, not surprisingly, this is not copy and paste. So you can't pick something up which works somewhere and drop it down somewhere else and expect it to flourish. But I guess under the skin of that, maybe there's 2 things for me. The first one is methodological, and we gave the networks a kind of outline framework, and then beyond that, they really kind of improvised and customized to what they needed. So broadly, one of those was an effect where all the cities worked with one another and they saw what happened on the ground in each of these situations. And then the other one, which is more of a kind of bilateral coaching kind of role for the lead partner, was one where it's more of a kind of one-to-one bespoke relationship. And I guess we had all the other versions in between. So it was a kind of hybridized experience. And then linked to that, the second point is just this whole thing about chunking things up. I mean, some of these are very complex, strategic, long-standing practices. And you're never ever going to translate them across. So being able to modularize them, break them up, understand the component parts, see which parts are more transferable than others was really helpful. And I think part of that also was creating some quick wins on the ground, where if you had skeptical politicians, for example, you could really see something tangible from the beginning, which helped get buy-in and ownership from people when you had that eye on the longer term scenario as well. So I think all of those things are in the frame for me, but I guess what we really understand is, with that adapt phase, then the whole thing falls apart. All of these pillars are equally important, but it's really central to the whole process. So I guess at the end of the day, the success of these networks stands or falls on whether people actually reuse them again and whether they're really transferred. Tell us a bit about that final reuse phase then, Matt. What are the key things we need to know?
Yeah, it's really important that there's a diverse range of stakeholders involved in the reuse of the good practice. This can't be undertaken in isolation by a municipality or by a public sector institution. There needs to be a range of departments and institutions engaged. So that includes the public sector, the voluntary and community sector, the private sector, and NGOs as well. So critical to reuse is that you have a balance, a diversity of different stakeholders. The second thing to remember is that these good practices have taken a long time to evolve in the good practice cities. The partner cities shouldn't rush it. They should think with the future in mind at the outset of the transfer networks. So they need to be thinking about the sustainability of their URBACT local group right at the outset and what they're going to do out with the framework of URBACT. How are they going to continue to reuse this into the future? So it's critical in this reuse stage to have a diversity of stakeholders, but also to think about the future at the outset of the transfer network.